2024 has been a pretty great year for a fan of the Legacy of Kain series. November saw the release of emulated versions of Blood Omen 1 and 2, and now the crown jewels of the series, Soul Reaver 1 and 2, have been released as remastered titles for PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. Finally, this long dormant series is able to be played on modern platforms, almost in its entirety. Soul Reaver was actually my first entry into the series, a copy lent to me by a friend, and it didn't take very long for me to be enchanted by my first foray into Nosgoth and swept away by the grand tale of vampires and destinies. With Aspire's remaster giving the game not only a fresh coat of paint, but also access to some of the cut content that never made it to the full game, how does Raziel's tale fare 25 years later? Are these games still fun to revisit, or have I been blinded by nostalgia? Let's take a look. When I think back on games that I loved as a kid, there's always something that stands out. A moment, a piece of music, a boss fight, that triggers a rush of memories and nostalgia. Terra's theme from Final Fantasy VI, or the Virgil boss fight at the top of Temuna Gru in Devil May Cry 3. For Soul Reaver, it's the sound of the Elder God saying Raziel. The voice acting across the Legacy of Kain series is absolutely phenomenal. It elevates what's already a rich narrative into something unforgettable. Across the 5 games, you get an intricate web of betrayal, destiny, and vengeance, but it's Soul Reaver 1 and 2 that stand out as the series' high points in storytelling. Set 1500 years after the events of Blood Omen, Soul Reaver begins with Raziel, one of Kain's vampiric sons, being cast into the abyss. His crime? Evolving before Kain by growing wings. Left for dead, Raziel is then resurrected by the Elder God, becoming a wraith who feeds on souls rather than blood. Armed with this new grim existence, and perhaps unknowingly following Kain's journey from Blood Omen, Raziel sets out on a path of vengeance against his brother and his maker, while also serving the Elder God's plan to cleanse Nosgoth of its vampiric corruption. From the ruined sanctuaries of his fallen brothers to the twists and turns of time itself, Raziel's journey is epic in every sense of the word. On paper, it might sound like standard gothic fantasy fare, but the dialogue and voice acting transforms it into something extraordinary. Every line feels like it was ripped from a Shakespearean stage play. It's heavy, dramatic, and delivered with absolute conviction, and after 25 years, that narrative remains as gripping as ever.
But the wheel must turn. Death is inexorable and cannot be denied. Your destiny is irresistible, Raziel. You are my Soul Reaver, the scourge of the vampires, reaper of their apostate souls.
While the narrative has weathered the ravages of time, the gameplay would not have, if it wasn't for some much appreciated improvements that the remaster has brought with it. The first and most important of these is a more modern control scheme. Being able to use the analog sticks to control movement and the camera is great, and even though it isn't perfect all the time, especially when it comes to the more precise platforming requirements, it is really good. They have also added a map and compass to the first game to try and help new players find their way around, which can be quite daunting as the world of Soul Reaver 1 is pretty open. Although their overall methods for exploration are quite different, there are a few major shared mechanics between Soul Reaver 1 and 2. The first of these is the Spectral Realm, where Raziel reawakens after Kain's betrayal. The Spectral Realm acts as a twisted mirror of the material one, a distorted reflection where water doesn't exist, and structures shift and bend but cannot be moved. At certain portals, Raziel can move to the material realm, creating a body for himself, and while in the material realm his body will slowly decay unless he consumes souls. And when you run out of health in the material realm, you will switch back to the spectral one. This switching between planes mechanic is integral to the exploration and the puzzles of the game, forcing you to switch back and forth to make progress. This was so cool to me when I was a kid. Being able to switch seamlessly between worlds without any loading times was mind-blowing, and if I'm being honest, it still is in my 30s. I love it as both a mechanic and narrative device, and its use in puzzles is one of the reasons I enjoy these games so much. Soul Reaver 1 leans very heavily on these exploration and puzzles. As you progress, you will unlock new abilities, like the ability to phase through fences and gates in the Spectral Realm, or climb rocky walls in the Material one, and these unlock new areas for you to travel to. There are many secrets to find in the world. Health or glyph upgrades or spells for Raziel to use are hidden in areas of the map that you'll have to backtrack with your new abilities to find, areas that you can miss completely if you just follow the main story path. At its core, Soul Reaver 1 is a puzzle game. Exploration is solving the puzzle of where to use the ability you just unlocked, with vague directional hints from the Elder God or Ariel. The dungeons are puzzles filled with smaller puzzles. The majority of these are block puzzles or shifting between the realms in platforming sections, but they do force you to take a look at your environment, listen to what has been said, and to think. Are you meant to be able to make that jump and you're just bad at it? Or do you need to switch to the Spectral Realm to change the room's layout, which will let you climb higher? Combat itself is also a kind of puzzle, as you will be mostly fighting vampires, who are incredibly tough to kill, as Raziel well knows. Impaling, sunlight, drowning, or setting on fire are the only ways that you can kill them, and the only weapons that Raziel has constant access to are his claws. After you have hit the enemy enough times, they will become stunned for a moment, and Raziel can pick them up and throw them, and this is where the puzzle comes in. Is there someone to throw them that will keep them down, such as environmental traps like spikes on the wall or a convenient pool of water to throw them into? You can also pick up weapons from enemies you've killed, like spears to impale new enemies on, but if you take the spear out before consuming their soul, they will pop back to life, so you need to consider what tools you have at your disposal in any encounter you decide to take on. All of the boss fights are puzzle fights too, with direct combat not working on any of Raziel's brothers. Having to figure out the mechanic behind them is key to victory. I really enjoy this aspect of Soul Reaver, and although the dodging in combat can sometimes feel a bit janky, it is forgivable because almost all of the time, if you want to, you can just avoid fighting enemies. You can run past most of them just to get to the next puzzle. Comparatively, Soul Reaver 2's gameplay is very stripped down when it comes to exploration, despite being on more powerful hardware. There is no exploration in the game. It's incredibly linear, going from point A to point B, interspersed with the odd combat encounter. I don't hate this, but coming straight from the more open world of Soul Reaver 1 does make it feel like a bit of a step backwards. Despite having no secrets to find in Soul Reaver 2, you do backtrack through the same locations multiple times as you earn new abilities or visit different time periods, and while these are all visually distinct, it doesn't feel like enough has changed to make the repeat journeys as fun. Combat 2 feels weirdly like a step backwards despite being more in depth. Raziel now has access to light and heavy attacks, the ability to block as well as dodge, but this ironically makes Raziel feel weaker. Enemies block constantly and it turns combat into a bit of a slog. I remember not hating Soul Reaver 2's combat when I was younger, and there's probably elements of combat that I have forgotten that would have made it a lot easier, but there isn't much of a tutorial for combat in the game. So whenever I had the opportunity to, I would just run past the enemies a lot more frequently than I chose to in Soul Reaver 1. There is a way to make combat much easier though, and that is by using the second important shared mechanic in the series, the Soul Reaver itself. Early on in Soul Reaver 1, Raziel finds himself bound to a spirit that creates a wraith blade that he can use to slay his foes. In the Spectral Realm, this blade is always available, but in the Material one it can only form when he is at full health. It is an incredibly powerful weapon, and can kill enemies outright without the need for impaling them or setting them alight, and it has the added benefit of stopping your body from slowly losing health while you explore. In Soul Reaver 2, however, after an event near the beginning of the game, this blade goes from symbiote to parasite, now being able to be summoned in the Material Realm regardless of Raziel's health. However, when you use it to kill an enemy, it immediately consumes their soul to make itself more powerful. If it reaches full strength, it instead begins to consume Raziel's health instead, making it a truly double-edged sword. Just like the realm shifting mechanic, I love this due to the way it ties the narrative in with gameplay, and the Soul Reaver is so powerful and unblockable that it takes down even the most powerful enemies in seconds. The issue is, without the Soul Reaver, combat is boring and a little bit frustrating, but with it, you end up running low on health and having to make trips back to the Spectral Realm fairly often just to heal up. One area I do feel like Soul Reaver 2 does improve though is in its puzzle variety. Throughout the game, Raziel visits various elemental forges to give new abilities to the Soul Reaver, and these are all incredibly inventive and fun puzzles. Like the dungeons of Soul Reaver 1, the puzzles layer in on each other, solving one progresses another at the same time, and between the different forges it rarely feels like an idea is reused, and they all fit perfectly within the forge's elemental theme, which makes these the best parts of actually playing Soul Reaver 2. There are a few pretty glaring issues with both games though that I do need to point out. Although these collections are remastered with some modern touches, like I said, there are a few things that have not been touched at all. The first of these is an incredibly archaic approach to saving. There are no autosaves in either game, with Soul Reaver 2 having specific save points that you can use to save your progress. There are some checkpoints that will bring you back if you die in combat, but the save points can be quite spread out if puzzles take you a while to solve, or if your game crashes. Soul Reaver 1 has the benefit of letting you save wherever you want from the menu, but when you load the save file, it puts you back in the starting area of the game, and then you have to go find a teleport to get back to the location you were before if you had found one. This, in some cases, is actually really convenient if you want to get to a teleport quickly. Just save and reload and then you're right next to one. When it's not convenient though, is when the game crashes halfway through a dungeon, and you have to start from the beginning again. I normally wouldn't gripe so much about this, as like I said, they are remasters of old games, and in an attempt to keep the games as faithful to the original vision as possible, I can see why they didn't change this. However, I had multiple crashes and bugs with both games. Soul Reaver 2 only crashed twice, which wasn't awful, but in Soul Reaver 1 I faced so many bugs, with textures disappearing, falling through floors, and random crashes during boss fights. It was so irritating. There is a trophy for getting through the Drowned Abbey dungeon without touching the water, which took me 3 hours to get, because every time I got past the entrance of the Abbey, I would have a texture issue and the game would crash until I gave up and tried again a few hours later. This exacerbated my annoyance with the save system, because it meant every crash included the frustration of running back from the starting area to the teleport in the Spectral Realm, transferring to Rahab's territory, running through the doors, watching the cutscene again, and then I get to try the trophy again. Despite my few issues with textures not loading sometimes though, both Soul Reaver games look really good. The improved textures and models look great, and the new lighting in the game really helps everything pop. I love that there's an option to pop back and forth between the original and remastered graphics by pressing R3. It's such a cool feature that I really enjoyed flicking between them just to compare them. Although they are not going to hold up to any new AAA release graphically, the improvements are incredibly impressive. The lighting is so much better, and all the details in the environments really bring out the best in Nosgoth. There is only one choice that I wasn't truly enamoured with though, and that was the day and night cycle that they added to Soul Reaver 1. I like it in some places, and it adds a level of atmosphere and progression that wasn't in the original. But the dark is too dark. Some of the dungeons, it made it really difficult to see what was happening and where I was going, and I think this could have done with a little bit of tweaking to get the desired result.
Precious firstborn son turned betrayer. You have missed so many changes, little Raziel. Look around you. See how the human's weapon of destruction has become my home. Indeed, my body.
From a trophy perspective, both Soul Reaver 1 and 2 are not overly difficult to complete and achieve their platinum trophies. They are, unfortunately, victims of the PS5's ability to only have one platinum if the game shares a launcher for some reason. The PS5 version of the remaster has Soul Reaver 2 as DLC for the first game, which is incredibly disappointing. The PS4 version, however, has 2 separate lists with individual platinums, which is what I ended up playing on in the end. Soul Reaver 1's list is the more expansive of the 2 games, with it having 55 trophies in total, and quite a few of these being missable. Some of these are for specific dungeons, while others will take a large chunk of the game before you can end them. The main long-term ones that you need to look out for are to not kill any humans that you find on your journey, and when you reach the human citadel, if one of the humans bows to you in worship, you will earn the Don't Be Afraid trophy. Once you have unlocked the Soul Reaver, you will find the spirit of Ariel at the Pillars of Nosgoth. She will provide cryptic hints as to where you should go next, and these update after every major boss fight. So make sure you go back to talk to her after beating every single boss to hear them all and earn Ariel Remembers. Each of the main dungeons has a specific missable trophy to watch out for as well, like the one I mentioned earlier for getting through the Drowned Abbey without touching the water for Don't Get Your Feet Wet, or for speaking to Dumas in the Spectral Realm before resurrecting him for Spectral Talk. So try and keep an eye on these and keep plenty of manual saves before each dungeon and boss, just in case. One of these trophies, for cutting off Zephon's legs with the Soul Reaver, actually bugged out on me and didn't pop when it should have, which meant I had to replay the first hour or so of the game again just to get this one trophy. There are also trophies for killing a number of enemies using all of the tools available to you. Stealth kills, impalements, fire, drowning, as well as one for specifically throwing an enemy into the abyss. You should also hurl yourself into the abyss after him for the trophy Beyond Death, and make sure you fall into the water at least once before beating Rahab in the Drowned Abbey for another trophy. The majority of the other trophies will come from finding all of the glyphs, health upgrades, and teleports, so make sure you explore Nosgoth thoroughly. Once you've completed all of this, you will earn the Platinum Trophy Redeemer and Destroyer, and be able to move on to the sequel. Soul Reaver 2 has fewer trophies overall than the original, but there are more missables to be aware of. The first of these is reportedly quite buggy, and although I didn't face the bug myself, you have to be aware of it. After you have left the Sarafan stronghold and gone out into the world, you will find crows sitting along your main pathway. You need to find and scare all of these away as you head toward the swamp area. There are also a few to look out for in the first area of the swamp. If you have done all of these, then you will find them sitting on a balcony just outside the Dark Forge, and if you scare them all again here, you will get the trophy Scare the Crows. You will also need to pay attention because you need to get a kill with every different weapon in the game that Raziel can pick up, and some of these become unobtainable once you've travelled through time, so make sure you pick everything up and get at least one kill with it to earn Finish Him. One other trophy that I want to point out that is quite difficult to get is because the enemy AI has a tendency to just stop sometimes. Once you have met Ariel at the Pillars, you will face your first Fire Demon. There is a chance when facing him that if you stand far enough away so he cannot hit you with his melee attack, but not far enough away that he throws fireballs, he will instead summon a small worm-like creature, called a Groundling. Killing this will earn you the Keep Your Distance trophy. This doesn't sound hard, but like I said, the enemy AI sometimes just stops, and it actually took me 30 minutes of waiting for him to actually spawn the creature, so I hope that you get luckier than I did. If it does take a while to spawn, what you can do is run past the enemy in the Spectral Realm to find a portal back to the Material one. Then come back to where the Fire Demon is, and he should respawn, hopefully resetting his eye and letting him use the ability. There are a few other missables to watch out for, but these are much less egregious. There is also a speedrun trophy for finishing Soul Reaver 2 in less than 6 hours, which I would recommend leaving for a second playthrough unless you already know the game really well and remember all of the puzzle solutions. With this need for a speedrun in mind, you will have multiple chances to obtain some of the other missable trophies. With this complete, you will finally earn the Full Circle trophy if you're running the PS4 version, or achieve 100% completion if you're playing on the PS5.
Let's drop the moral posturing, shall we? We both know there's no altruism in this pursuit. Your reckless indignation led you here. I counted on it.
They say that true love lasts forever, and that is how I feel about the Soul Reaver games. The remasters have done so much to touch up its aging looks and mechanics, but they are still products of their time, and despite this, I still adore them as much as I did when I was a kid. The narrative is still a classic, and playing through it again has only reminded me just how great it is. The biggest issue with these remasters is the number of bugs and crashes that I had, and it's really disappointing. I do think these can be fixed with time, and I hope they will be because they sour an otherwise amazing experience. Despite all my gripes and issues though, and bugs with trophies and environments, especially in Soul Reaver 1, I actually have no qualms about recommending these classics to anyone who loves a good story. I just hope it's not another 20 years before we get a remaster of Defiance. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this look at Soul Reaver 1 and 2 Remastered and what it takes to earn the Platinum trophies. Please consider leaving a comment or subscribing if you did enjoy it, and until next time, happy hunting.